Thank you for giving me this spot to summarize the day's activity and try to bring some kind of conclusion to the day. So I would put it in three general categories, the discussion. One is local and regional journalism is in a crisis, the journalistic Big Bang. Second, that there, and this is a little bit tailored for this particular audience, there's a great opportunity for leadership, and particularly in public media. And three, what are the ways forward? So we start with this premise that credible news and information are essential for democracy. The watchdog function, citizen informing, community building, inclusiveness. We talked about diversity being so important and having a dialogue with your community, and also empowering the citizens in your audience. And Tom Rosenstiel pointed out that what a journalist needs to do in the organization, understand the function of a news organization, how it plays in its community, and accumulate knowledge about how the community works. But what is keeping them? Well, we've got this explosion, this revolution. Technology has moved us in two directions, Jeff Cole tells us. On the one hand, broadband is always on, and mobile is everywhere. So we're broadband and we're mobile. Second, consumer behavior has changed from consuming the package to consuming the unit. So he pointed out about music being the CD year to the song minute, television from the season and guide to the show per hour, and the newspaper per day to the story per minute. And what does that mean, by the way? One of the things that, I'll just do an aside, that somebody from Google pointed out is if the story is the unit of consumption, then advertising, the search is going to be a major way of advertising. And that certainly helps the aggregators and the searchers, not necessarily the creators of the information. He also pointed out the role of social networking as an arising, if not dominant, form of communication going forward. Advertising is also changing, moving to self-advertising, search, targeted, results-oriented. Then it was suggested, well, is the Star Tribune and Google in the same business? It was suggested they were, that they aggregate large audiences and sell to them. I think that's a good question. And in some way or another, you are dealing with audiences and monetizing audiences. So in that sense, but there are, as he pointed out, the search is a national function, but there are ways of monetizing that audience. And we still have more information available than ever. We, as citizens, have access to more information when you include the online audience. But journalism is unbundling, Tom Rosenstiel tells us. The functions are unbundling. So you have different people possibly serving the different functions, and he gave a list of the various functions that journalism serves. We also have different funding sources for all these potentially different funding sources. So what is the funding issue with journalism? Is it a structural problem, as one person suggested? Do we have an advantage by being a nonprofit, by actually having more sources of funding? Then Jim Dolan pointed out that what a journalist needs to do is at least serve one community well, and suggested that communities aren't necessarily just by geography, but also by interest. But the delivery system, there's a need to not only maintain newsroom resources, but also the values. And we've also seen that there are huge untapped resources in the newsroom that are not getting out, that are not being distributed, according to Tom. So Ken Doctor suggested, as a result, that he had a list of issues coming forward, that local news audiences are up for grabs. Big players are developing local farm systems. Smart content management is a must. Networking is key, as Joaquin also pointed out. And video and obviously mobile are ascendant. Another question that came up is news a public good or a consumer good? Is it completely monetizable, or is it also something that we have to monetize or have the public support. Really, what we're getting to is who will pay for professional enterprise journalism. I think that's one of the real worries that most people have as we think about our democracy in the past and the importance, and we just said of the importance to democracy, of enterprise journalism, beat and investigative journalism. And here today we heard of a $5 million grant to Minnesota Public Radio for enterprise journalism, which was a tremendous step. It's really encouraging. We also saw that there are a number of competitors for our attention. We're in an attention economy. So sure, the newspapers are having to retool and adapt, and we saw examples of how they're doing that. And then we had the list of the various kinds of competitors and very interesting categorizations of the ankle biters, the knee choppers, the watchdogs, the pro-am aggregators, the journalism as manufacturers, the city examiners, the searchers, and in the end, though I changed the order a little bit so I could lead into public radio stations, but the importance of public radio stations as a factor. So it's very, one of the messages that at least I got out of this day was that public media have a real opportunity. This is a real, obviously a crucial time. It's a crucial moment in this explosion and revolution. And public media were defined as mission-driven organizations, the importance of access for all voices. Diversity came through over and over again. And the idea of looking at the audience as readers and users and citizens, not just as data. And therefore a need to engage in respectful dialogue. As the Knight, I put in a little plug for the Knight Commission, they talked about civic engagement and the importance of journalism for civic engagement. And just as the example, the Times-Picayune did a story a year before Katrina on the levees, the vulnerability of the levees, but people didn't do anything about it. So unless you take the information and also engage the community engages. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault other than somebody in leadership didn't move forward in that. I'm sorry, Beth, I'm not looking at you. She's there. Public media has a great opportunity to do that, and I thought it was very interesting that the Star Tribune named their biggest competitor in Minneapolis as Minnesota Public Radio. So nevertheless, moving to multimedia, as one participant pointed out, raises costs significantly. So it's not going to be so easy just to segue into, for at least radio, to segue into this multimedia universe. And it's, again, looking at radio more specifically, they haven't necessarily been in the shoe leather journalism business. At least that was an allegation. So the question is, how do you move forward and take advantage of that opportunity? So we talked about, in the course of the day, structural models. And legacy institutions are adapting. Some are, some aren't. There are some different models. The pro-am, the professional and amateur, I call it network journalism, including amateurs in the process, bringing in the audience, various ways of doing that. There was discussion and kind of a poo-pooing of the Wikipedia model because of the editorial functions, but let's face it, if you have a news event, Fort Hood, and you went to Wikipedia, you would get information almost, within a very short time, plus the context. And, you might be thinking about contextualizing over an extended period of time news stories. And then the citizen payer, that was a suggestion. The contributions, that is something that is emerging as a model. I think one of the questions any business person asks is, what business are we in? And what came through loud and clear today is the business is the information business, just as the business of trains was the transportation business or steamships. They're presumably in the transportation business. there was a number of suggestions of win-win media partnerships, aligning public radio, television, aligning with newspapers, aligning with online media. And if a trusted brand is key, we know, and this didn't come out in the conversation, but I'll editorialize, we know that the most trusted brands are the public media networks. We also talked about leadership and that there's a crisis of leadership. That leadership needed to move off the old legacy models. They need to anticipate and vision the future and motivate people to act. So who's going to be doing that? And that was a great question. Another issue of leadership and the role of journalism is, what is your role in the community? Is it being standing apart from the community and criticizing it? That's the watchdog in a certain respect. Or is it to come in and aid the community? And just as another aside, I once did a conference with the Arab, it was called the Arab U.S. Media Forum, and we went into, what is the function of journalism? And the Americans said, it's to tell the truth, get the truth out. And most of the Arab reporters said, it's to change society. And how you look at your function, your role, changes how you look at how you report. But there was an urge to bring new leaders into these worlds. Then we get to funding. And a debate on, are we talking about a revenue problem or a cost problem? And we heard both. I mean, we certainly heard that there's a revenue problem, and we know that the United States, particularly in the public broadcasting area, does not support it anywhere near to the level that many other countries do. But also, obviously the revenues in newspapers is declining significantly, very significantly. But they're cutting costs, and the suggestion was that the distribution costs are moving towards zero when you talk about going online, and that the differentiator is a question of design and content. That the newspaper is no longer a monopoly, and yet we see that the print subscriber still accounts for 85% of the revenue of newspapers. Newspapers are still operating, most of them, many of them, are operating at a decent margin. That they are still able to get advertising. They have to rethink the advertising model, but I mean, they're obviously in it. They're getting subscriptions, but there's more. And the example was given of the Star Tribune thinking about giving away classifieds in order to have information to sell to other customers. The advertising as a one other important point was that there's a lot of money in local advertising that's still out there, that there's an untapped market there, that there's a great opportunity. Subscription payments generally come out to about 10%. I understand nonprofit contributions is about 10%. It's a similar number. The search as a revenue source is something national in nature. It's pretty much Google and Yahoo and a couple of others. But maybe there are some other ways of getting some new online revenue from putting your material online. And then we came to the government role. What is the government role? And the big question is, to what extent should government subsidize journalism? We've seen that government has done that in the form of postal subsidies from the early days of the Republic all the way to now. But, and obviously it supports public broadcasting to the extent it does, but should there be some other government roles? I put in, I've kind of developed a matrix in the suggestion that over the next 5 to 10 years, what we're going to see is just a period of experimentation, that it's going to be a combination of for-profit organizations are going to be experimenting, nonprofit, maybe in partnership. But you're going to be experimenting with the different functions of journalism and serving those various functions, if we're talking about the unbundling world of journalism, and the various sources of income that you might have. And there, nonprofits have an advantage because there's a few more. They can do almost every source that for-profit can, except for private equity, but they can also get philanthropy and government to the extent government comes in. So there's a few questions we want, and so that's really where we are so far, but we really haven't answered some of the big questions. And what I really would like to get out of our audience, which includes the panelists, but the audience, and maybe even if we can get some online, is what are the big ideas for solutions? Do we have any big ideas here to move us forward? What needs to change? Who will lead, and who needs to lead? And how are we going to go from this issue of, well, saving newspapers and worrying about the distribution mode to the very important question of how are we going to preserve the newsrooms, the enterprise journalism, and journalistic values in the media going forward? So with that, I would like to call on Bill Kling, who I was going to call on him whether he raised his hand or not.
Charlie, you just said something that I thought was interesting. First of all, I want to point out that Mike Sweeney and I are sitting in the same row, though we are keeping one seat open between us. But it reminds me a little bit of what one of our former board members and a great civic leader in this community, a guy named Ken Dayton, used to say about his business. He was a retailer, a company that became Target. And he always embraced competitors because he said, one car dealership doesn't do very well. If you get a row of them, you bring in customers and you keep the interest in buying cars going. The same in a mall. You never put in a single big box retailer. You had to have at least 2 or 3 to make it work well. So I don't know who's competing with whom or who will in 10 years, but it seems to me that the bigger issue is keeping the community engaged, keeping people interested in the information that we're putting out, rather than whether or not one of us is trying to get ahead of the other one. And so the issue that I'm left with today is that a lot of people talked about, will newspapers survive, and how many years will they survive, and how much newsprint are we printing now versus how much we used to. Distribution is, I think someone said, free. And so if distribution is free and trends are changing in terms of how you use it, you come down to the one basic, which is the newsroom, which is why I raised my hand, because that's what you ended with. The newsroom is what's critical. Where does the content come from, and how do you pay for it? And right now, it's free. And a lot of you talked about it being free, but nobody talked about how do you change that. A guy named Steve Jobs came along, and I think saved the music industry. I mean, I think it was gone when he finally figured out how to save it. Now, it's not nearly as profitable for the music producers as it used to be, but at least it's a business model that is in part working. So this is a long response to your question, or maybe it's a question back to you, but I think the thing we've not addressed for regional news or any news is how do you keep one or more, and hopefully more, newsrooms engaged? And if we don't have more, I'm convinced that we'll lose the society that's interested in the content because they just won't see enough of it. It won't be worth reading. It won't be good enough. It won't be strong enough. And then you got a real problem. Then Thomas Jefferson should be worried.
A great point in thinking about the news ecology in a community. And if we have enough competitors giving good journalism, people are going to demand good journalism and want good journalism and not stand for anything less, and they can get it in various ways. I mean, it's not just journalism, also information, but journalism is a very good intermediary for people to understand the information that's out there. What about some either answers to Bill's challenge? And Bill, one other thing we'd like to do is hear, what do you plan to do with that $5 million of that will eventually be $10 million for enterprise journalism? That's actually very encouraging. Chris, how does that manifest itself for the community?
It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity that we're going to take great care with and do a lot of listening before we really do anything, frankly. There's a lot of gaps in our marketplace in the region that we see need to be filled. There's a lot of enterprise work that's out there. I think any news organization can name, frankly, 10 or 15 things they want to do tomorrow, but don't have the resources to do. I think we'll take careful inventory of what needs to be done. We'll do some careful listening, and we'll align our resources where we see the journalistic needs are and the needs are of the audience. It's a wonderful privilege to be able to serve the audience with this money, frankly, and it's something that we're going to take great care with and some time with, frankly, because it's easy to make wrong decisions quickly. So I'd like to be deliberate about it and thoughtful.
Yep.
Several people have said that distribution is free, and I think that's an enormous mistake to say that. Talk to Verizon and AT&T and ask them if broadband is free. It's not. And the reason that cable companies were able to subvert the television model is because local governments require that they lay cable to every single home in cities. Those were the franchise agreements. So we buy into a myth by saying distribution on the internet is free. You may not pay for it, but implicit in that free is a whole construction of the economy of bandwidth, which we're not dealing with very effectively as a country. So again, I go back to the $7.2 billion that is going to be spent on infusing communities with broadband, and ask, what are we doing in relationship to that? Because I think it's really critical that we understand the economics of broadband, which keeps flashing up here like it's magic. It's not. This is communications technology.
Well, the estimates are that it'll cost between $50 and $350 billion to bring broadband to the entire country. So it's not free. Josh, you've have had a number of ideas, big ideas.
Yeah.
What's the big?
Well, I think the biggest idea is that we have to be sober about the fact that there is a lack of attention and political will in Washington around these issues, despite their enormous magnitude and importance. And as many know from statements I've made in the last few months, there are major commissions and initiatives at federal agencies and at the White House level on all kinds of issues, from the environment. The FCC is embarking in a national broadband plan. There needs to be a national journalism plan that is endorsed and supported by the White House and by the Congress. And I think that is not something that I don't wake up in the morning and say, I want a commission. But when I look at what it's going to take to actually get the political will and the political leverage to make any of the things we're talking about from a policy point of view actually happen in Washington, that's going to be absolutely essential. And I think we might want to look at it with a few different tiers of motion. One, another major commission like Knight that would really give stature and credibility to such a commission. Number two would be a really strong set of staff, because it needs to be staffed with people who actually understand policy and can do the research and the detailed analysis to actually come up with a raft of policy prescriptions or recommendations, rather than as the secondary step after the vision's been laid out by these reports. And third, I think we need to do a national. You might have heard former FCC Chairman Michael Powell has come up with this idea of the nutrition needs of communities, much like the nutrition pyramids you see on when you're in grade school. I think it's a great idea. We think this idea of getting thousands of communities nationwide to tell us, tell policymakers, tell their politicians, are our nutrition, information nutrition needs being met? Yes or no? Do we have enough local journalism? Are our schools and municipal buildings connected to high-speed broadband? Is it fast enough? Is it affordable enough? I think if we could do all of this together in concert, I think we have the makings of a big picture viable plan.
Well, I'm not going to take positions on which solution is the right one, and I wish you luck with that. Getting all that organized. I would say that journalists will be naturally wary of the government saving them, having spent most of their life observing the government trying to save things. But I would submit that to the extent that I heard a big idea here today, I'd pick up on Bill's analogy about the music business. It wasn't really Steve Jobs that saved the music business. It's the concert industry that saved the music business. And there's an interesting analogy, I think, for us in that, which is that in the business of making music, they found a whole different revenue model that wasn't about selling the records. The records drive people to the concerts. And I think the publisher of the Star Tribune got very close to this with a radical idea like, let's give away the classified and find a new business in that. Where I would differ, where I'm nervous that Ken and Jeff are wrong, that advertising may not, in fact, be the solution on the commercial side for news. And I think if we wait for that to happen, we may watch our own demise. Yeah, I think it's inventing new businesses in the model of acquiring and synthesizing and disseminating knowledge. There are new businesses here beyond advertising. I think that's the big idea.
Yeah, I want to address the issue of who should fund this, first of all. And I am deeply opposed to government funding. Senator Franken came to me and my managing editor right before he went to Washington. He said, "Do you want Washington to get involved?" And I said, "Absolutely not. Shame on us. Shame on us if we cannot solve this problem." The problem in our business has been a lack of imagination, a lack of leadership, a lot of hide on very tradition-bound organizations. But if we use the entrepreneurial spirit that built this country, that built Google, we can solve this problem. And I do, Mr. Kling, I am not opposed to competition. I love competition. Competition makes us better. I've been in newsrooms that are far too complacent because they didn't have enough competition. I am, however, troubled by when government and nonprofit money quashes entrepreneurship. So I bring this up not to put you on the spot, Rick, but Rick went out and started a business. He got money to support his business that then paid for jobs, and then NPR used state tax money to buy a competitor to him. That troubles me. It's not about competition, but it is about how much do you squash the entrepreneurial spirit that we need to both fix this problem and build for the future.
Can I just clear up the record for a moment? We didn't. That money wasn't used to purchase a competitor.
Well,
the money was used to hire someone who happened to build something that is in the same niche as Rick. So we didn't go buy a tool.
No,
what we did is
you bought a business that will compete with an existing business, or a piece of a business.
The business was being built irrespective of what that one particular person was doing. I mean, it was coincidental, and we hired the person. I mean, the way you're sticking those facts together.
But it's the same business model, news aggregation?
That's part of it,
yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
I'll buy you guys a beer after
okay.
the session.
Richard, but also I want to, Howard Stevenson, maybe we could get you into this discussion. And is there any question? Well, I'm going to give you sort of an open mic to, please identify yourself and your role, and particularly the NPR.
I'm Howard Stevenson. I'm chairman of NPR. I also happen to be chairman of the Harvard Business School Publishing, so I get to suffer from two dimensions.
I mean, how are you seeing the the way forward in terms of journalism? I mean, you're obviously NPR is taking a leadership role. You've got your Argo project around the corner. You're talking about partnering with other people, and just curious how you see this space today.
Well, the word entrepreneurship has been mentioned a number of times, and that's my academic background, is teaching it, creating the courses at Harvard. And entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources you currently control. And I see us as having tremendous opportunity because of the change in technology, but we don't have the resources. You know, if I was on the board of Landmark that developed the Weather Channel, and we spent much more money than NPR will ever be able to spend to create the Weather Channel. So I think what we're trying to do is say, how do we cooperate, not get into a complex, I mean, over the years, all of the joint ventures that are signed up, about 60% of them fail within 2 years. But how do we make it so that it is a mutually attractive proposition to work with people where we each get something out of the deal? And I've been using the word deal at NPR, which just about got me shot by some of the staff. But people want to know, what are we getting and what are we giving? And I think that the biggest thing we have to do is figure out what we can give and what we have to get, but you have to start with what we give. I believe that technology is a huge opportunity for everyone in this room, because in fact it is changing the game, and the local monopolies, I'm sorry, newspapers, are in trouble, but I think that we have an opportunity to serve. You know, people are scared right now. People are trying to figure out, what does this event mean to me, and what does this idea mean to me? And that's what we can do, is help them figure it out. We can't tell them what it is. That's what CNN and Fox and a few other people are trying to do. But we can help give them enough information that they can figure out what is happening and what does it mean for them. And if we can do that, I think we'll get a lot of support, philanthropically as well as membership-wise.
Maybe I'm reading the discussion incorrectly, but I get nervous in these discussions when I sense that the focus is somehow that we have this massive hole in the journalism space that seems to be opening up, that somehow needs an appropriately massive solution to it, whether it's in funding or some magical technology or whatnot. I pull my hair out every time I read another article saying, oh, the Kindle is going to save the journalism industry. Not only is it not going to happen, frankly, it doesn't need to happen, in my view. I think we have a rich information arena out there that is going to get richer as we go forward. I think what we are in the midst of, which I think causes us to have the kinds of discussions we're having today, is a transmogrification that is dirty, dusty, noisy, unfocused, chaotic, and we're uncomfortable with it. But frankly, the trends are all in the right direction. And I go back to that core principle. The reason why newspapers are having a difficult time is the internet put a printing press in everyone's hands. One of them being Craig Newmark. So went classifieds. But it put a printing press in everyone's hands, and that's a great thing. So I say all this only because I just wish I get troubled when I hear existing institutions get focused on the need for an external solution to the problem instead of focusing on all the difficult detail, yes, of changing our behaviors and processes and products. We didn't talk much about this today, but I could give you a long rant just on how we change the products. How do we present our information in ways that are more appropriate to the world going forward than the world in the past? But instead we come back focusing on, well, we need the government to save us or Kindle to save us. We don't. And I'll close with just one comment. Early in my career at PBS, interestingly, I had the pleasure of meeting I.F. Stone. And some of you might remember him, and he was just, a legendary muckraker. He worked outside mainstream journalism. He made people uncomfortable. Most people in the United States didn't know a word of I.F. Stone, but he influenced the agenda because the right people did hear him. He didn't make a lot of money. He had maybe 10,000 subscribers to his newsletter, but he did good investigative journalism. Think of I.F. Stone as a prototypical blogger, because that's what he was, right? Josh Marshall is the new I.F. Stone, and there are lots of them. So, again, maybe I'm misreading the conversation, but I just would beg that all of us focus internally and figure out how do we take and, as best we can, yes, look at the entrepreneurial activity going on outside, because there's lots of it, and that's where change is truly happening, and see how can we adopt some of that change into our organizations to be successful going forward.
What I heard. I rode my mountain bike to the Secretary of State's office just at the top of that hill to file my articles of incorporation in 1994. The first book I read in college at the time was The Fountainhead, so I could have sworn I was a libertarian at the time. And as subsisting on ramen noodle for several years, I am a rabid capitalist. I financed my company with $200 in my own pocket. But I will tell you, Nancy, I do think, I agree with a little bit of what everybody said. But Nancy, the difference is news is of a different class, kind of like the national parks are of a different class. I don't think the government should get into a lot of different areas. And part of the reason I joined the board of Minnesota Public Radio is because that I think there's certain things that I haven't seen happen as a consumer of the news divisions, of the television channels that are private, and I'm a little concerned. And part of it is the makeup of the fact that I did not pay attention in social studies. Now I realize as much as I should have. And every day I grow more and more just amazed at the story of the country. And I never understood, and really until the last 5-10 years, the importance of the fourth estate. And so in that, I ask for an expanded point of view on that one, to consider that news and the importance of journalism is different than the other things that the government might butt its nose in. Josh, on your proposal, I love the vision. I share some of the skepticism that Tom has for it. My only advice on advancing those ideas in the areas where people might be as skeptical is just the idea of a commission. Everybody's always going to get nervous when they hear the word national or commission. Is just to tell them the terms under which you would dissolve it. It's temporary, and as soon as we hit these goals, we're out of here. I do this at my private company, which is every new policy has to have an expiration date. That way the laws die on their own in case nobody were around. So I agree with a little bit of both of you, and I share the issue there, but it's like, I can't imagine the park system being run by, I don't know, Great America Incorporated. So that's the only thing, I think, one of the reasons we're here today. This is a special class.
We do have Disney parks. They're different, but we do have them. No, I mean, that's the, go ahead, Bill, and then Meryl.
I think there is a dichotomy of false choices going on here a little bit. From the Gutenberg Bible to Geek Squad, we have gone from, there was a time when everybody sat around and read the Gutenberg Bible. That was the only medium available to you, right? And through the history of mankind, we have had an increasing diversity of media sources, and the trend in all of those is an increase in the ability of the person consuming the media to control the time, place, manner, and subject matter of that material. Now, with current technological changes, all of us, irrespective of whether we're for-profit or non-profit media, are facing challenges in how we can adapt to this very significant change in the ability of the audience to control that time, place, manner, and subject matter, including, I'm not going to listen to this. I'm not going to hear it. I don't care about it. And so then I think the question, that Josh, I think you're probably the best to lead on this, is are there specific critical sources of information that are, in essence, unavailable to communities that are in need of subsidy, that are in need of some kind of governmental support, or supporting those aspects of the free market that could also then deliver that information? I don't have the question. I don't have the answer to that question, but I think that's one of the fundamental issues that we have to address as a policy matter going forward. And once we get that, then I think we can get beyond that sort of dichotomy of false choices.
Let me just add, I think it's Clay Shirky who suggested that the 100 years after the invention of the printing press, there was a period of extreme turmoil, that people went from the illuminated manuscript, and you could read more before the Gutenberg Bible. There was plenty of books if you were a monk and you were willing to sit there and copy a book. But there was this period of 100 years where there was uncertainty, and if you were in the middle of that 100 years, you wouldn't understand where the printing press was going and what was happening. And the suggestion is that we're in a period right now of extreme experimentation. We don't really know where it's headed. You wouldn't be able to. We're in the barrel. And it's just a matter of moving forward and having a lot of different ideas, hopefully good, big ideas, but some will fail, some will succeed, and moving forward. But what I'd like to do in the last couple of minutes is see if we have some other sort of overreaching big ideas. And Ken, looks like you've... Merrill, oh, that's right, Merrill, sorry.
Thank you, Charlie. I just wanted to emphasize what has been talked about here, I think inadequately, and that is the scale of the local commercial opportunity. We need to get behind MinnPost. MinnPost and the others like it are blossoming from a product point of view around the country. We saw Pegasus on the screen before. There are startups in Seattle and Orange County, California, and in Miami, and in Atlanta, and in Boston, and New York. This is happening. We're in a very fertile period, but the advertiser and audience support for these new projects is only slowly emerging. And not until the advertising base emerges from local advertisers will this really blossom to its fullest. And we all have a role to play as citizens in trying to do all we can to make that happen. It is still the case that local advertisers have not been called on by anybody from an internet company. And Joel's going to fix that, and Voice of San Diego, we're going to fix that. They're going to get called on, but it's early, and we've got to support this and be patient with it.
The idea here that the advertisers, we have the same issue here related to the audience, I think, that we have to the advertiser, which is how are we going to attract them? And that is an onus that ultimately falls on us to persuade, to convince, to show, to demonstrate. To market. And my grandfather, you know, a coal miner, used to say, you can't talk your way out of stuff you acted your way into. I always loved that kind of axiom, that truth. And we have acted ourselves into a position where we have become detached from the audience, I think. And this is a broad brush, and I know there are counterexamples everywhere, right? But we have detached ourselves from the audience from a relevancy point of view, and I think we do the same with advertisers. Advertisers are looking for ways to connect, to have a meaningful relationship with an audience. And part of our responsibility as content generators, and we do some of that as well, content generators and content distributors, is to help them make that connection. And I really believe that there's just a core reality there that we should own up to and work toward activating directly one-on-one with our audience and with our potential underwriters.
Several comments off of last several minutes. I think one is while I like the goals that you got, Josh, and the idea of Congress approving a plan for American news after what we've seen go on with the health plan, I kind of picture, you know, we're thinking news, and I think we end up getting Comcast lobbyists, Verizon lobbyists, News Corp, and well beyond and be very careful what you wish for once you get into that arena, I think. The hole in the market, Richard, you're talking about, I think it is very definable, and you're right. It is this amazing time that we're talking about here in the last hour, where there's this incredible robustness going on. At the same time, the gap is really clear. It's local reporting and certain kinds of local reporting. And I think it is very important to define it very carefully for what it is, and it's not local comment and opinion, it's local reporting. And so if that's the gap, and that is really the big gap, but it's definable. Leonard tried to put a number on it. I think that's very useful. What is that number? It's $488 million. It's a lot less than the $30 billion, right, that the industry's taking in, whatever that number is. And lastly, I think to this whole question of kind of the spice in the day, and the way it'll get written up is, Star Tribune says, NPR is its #1 competitor. Very interesting, and it makes a good lead. All of us will recognize. I think it would be a really interesting exercise, and this isn't for this kind of group to do, but it's very easy, and especially for those of us who are journalists in the room, it's very easy to go to the competition. It would be an interesting question to put that aside for a day and to say, in the Twin Cities, great market, great audience, great couple of cities here, and people who love to read the news. What would happen if you tried to say, the goal here is to have more news? That's the goal, is to have more news. And it's not just the Star Tribune versus NPR, if in fact it is, but we've got MinnPost, we've got what Daily Planet's doing, we have the Pioneer Press down the street, and we have KARE, which was here, many outlets. How would it work in this new ecosystem that we're all fumbling at trying to describe if you said, we want to promote as much content creation as possible, but how do you take the values, for instance, in advertising selling, that commercial entities have the experience in and are best at doing, and could help monetize those who don't sell advertising right now, with distribution being as cheap or as expensive as we think it is? What if distribution were shared, so that you take what you need to do to get the news out there, which is really distribution of various kinds, old and new. You get advertising selling, old and new, and you apply it across different companies. You can call it a network, you could call it a cooperative, you could call it an exchange. How might that work? It may well founder, but I think you've got an opportunity here, and somewhat uniquely in the Twin Cities, to see what that model could look like. And I would just offer that as a challenge before going, to the bunkers and declaring competition and seeing where that takes everybody.
So we've heard, we're going to hear from Laura Walker. That's our last comment. We've heard about, by the way, partnership in creation of media. You're talking about partnership in distribution as well. Yes.
I think this is a really interesting end of the day, and thank you again, Bill, for convening people. I think the challenge that those who don't believe in government funding, I think it's a very interesting question and an interesting challenge, because it makes us in public media really ask, why do we deserve both the subsidies and the government funding? And it makes me think we have to, again, go back to what is our mission. And our mission is to really preserve and sustain the quality of journalism, but also to hear diverse voices, to reach out to our communities. These things are not going to just be done by, there's going to be a lot of holes coming up, I think, and there are already holes. And I do believe that there is a very, very strong role for public media to come in and to play a keen role, and a really, really important role. And I think there's a huge potential to build a different kind of structure within public radio and public media, where that we really can fill the need for local journalism, for convening discussions that aren't being had, and for helping to create a kind of a respectful debate about things that we're not having real deep quality. And if you take the 488 million or 500 million, if you look at, could we create something where we could have centers around that are public media stations or public radio stations, public television stations, or just other nonprofits, where we think about this 500 million, that would probably be about 500 reporters, and really building something out in communities around this country where the funding would need to come from the community first and from a visionary first in the community, with perhaps a third from philanthropies, that major foundations that believe in this, and from CPB or government to help support this, so we could really create something that would not just be serving local communities, but also in the way that public radio does when it does it well, really picks up and takes the best out of these and creates a national conversation as well, so that it's a conversation with the folks out on an Indian reservation and the Latino community in Los Angeles and the community in Brooklyn, and that all of those threads are being pulled together. And I think there's a real potential in that.
Well, let me pull this to a close then by observing that we've heard from some very interesting entrepreneurs, and I'm actually very hopeful coming out of this, that the experiments, the entrepreneurs, the market approach can bring about some very good, interesting journalism, that there is a role, but it probably needs to be mission justified for public support, for government support, where warranted. This is a time of opportunity. This technological revolution has created a great opportunity. But in the end, the technology is not going to substitute for good journalism, for enterprise journalism, for journalistic values, or for wisdom. So in the end, the responsibility is on our leaders, is on our workers in our various media institutions, and really in the end, in our citizens. The citizens have to demand it. So I'm left with the final sentence of the Knight Commission report, which is the information issue is everyone's issue. Thank you.
Great. That's right. Thank you for being here, for sitting for 8 hours through this. I think we had about 100 of you in the room. I'm told we had about 1,500 people participating online, sending their questions in. And it's been a really interesting exploration for me. I want to thank all of you who came and agreed to participate and gave us your best thinking. It's interesting to me that the New York Times has in its new building a space like this that is used for purposes like this. And so does WNYC, and so do we, and so does KPCC in Southern California Public Radio in Los Angeles. There's a trend there that seems to me others mentioned, where we're beginning to think about a role beyond just delivery through the usual media, but actually bringing people together as we did today, and this has been a wonderful example of that. The next thing on the agenda is a reception. And in honor of the fact that so many of you are from California, we're going to have it out on the deck. But if you don't choose that option, there will also be one in the lobby outside. And again, thanks for giving us your best thought, for caring so much about this subject, and for being with us today.
I mean,